Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see so many of you here today, particularly when it's so cold outside. I would have much preferred to stay in bed all day, but it didn't present itself as an option, unfortunately. How is it where you are, Will? We've been threatened with snow, which for Bournemouth is quite something. What about where you are?
So I've just looked outside the window. It is snowing.
Wow.
Yeah. It won't let me turn my video on, Matt.
Let me see if I can enable it. Let's say the great advantage of Bournemouth is that it never snows here because it's too wet. Apparently there's some kind of effect from the sea that I should have remembered from GCSE geography, but that apparently is what's to blame.
No, it's been snowing quite a lot recently, actually, which has been quite nice. Yeah.
Good. Well, I think probably I may stick that in the poll actually later. See who's got snow where they are.
Yeah.
You know, try and get a sense of the pulse of the UK and further afield. sorry if this feels parochial to those of you in the Southern Hemisphere who are enjoying, I presume, much nicer weather, it being in effect mid-August in Australia and South Africa and other places that way inclined. So today we're going to be talking about developing soft skills, both for Oxford and Cambridge interviews, and I suppose for medicine as well, now I think of it, but also for the rest of your life in the event that the interview goes well and you still need the skills, or in the event the interview goes less well and you just need them anyway. And then next week we'll be coming back to talking specifically about a subject, talk about law at Oxford and Cambridge, and probably a few other places as well. And we've got a fantastic law tutor who's going to be joining us for that to really give us some insights from kind of cold face of the legal world. Now I've changed these slides around this week, as loyal viewers will have noticed. And one of the things I've left out is the slide where I get Will to introduce himself. And it looks like there isn't a convenient place for me to do it. So I'm just going to ask Will, who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Matt. I'm Will. I'm the lead consultant at UniAdmissions. What that means is I spend most of my time speaking with students, speaking with parents, and also sort of helping run my team of other consultants. And ultimately, our job is to give advice, give guidance for students when they get in touch with us. For students who are asking us for support, or where more support might be relevant, we make recommendations. But equally, there will be students that come to us looking for support where a program isn't suitable. So at which point, again, we just give advice and guidance. So yeah, that's what I spend most of my time doing. I studied at Oxford myself, so certainly for the Q&A later, I'll be more helpful for questions on that side of things, probably more helpful for the Cambridge-based questions, and that pretty much sums it up.
My name is Matt. I look after our research arm here at UniAdmissions. So my job is to make sure that everything that we suggest in this webinar, in our books and our courses and our programs, really everywhere, everything that we suggest is backed up by evidence that it is supported by the research that we do into the Oxford and Cambridge and medical school admissions processes, and that what we do works rather than simply feeling nice or looking good. So we're going to be looking at three things, three broad sort of topics today in this relatively short set of slides. First of all, we're going to be asking the question, what are soft skills? Then, having determined what they are, knowing what Oxbridge think about them, what they're looking for, and then now you've established that they're worth having, thinking about ways in which you can go on to develop them. So what are these famed soft skills? So I looked around for some definitions, which is always a lazy way to start an argument. Best way to start a bad essay. The dictionary says. So soft skills are the skills that are associated with connections, whether these are conceptual connections or social connections. I'm thinking about communication, adaptability, empathy, knowing how to put things together, how to respond to new information well, and most importantly, being able to communicate new information with other people. Now, the challenge of soft skills, I think, and Will, I think we'll go on to speak a little about this, is that whereas in the kind of hard skills space, you're sort of doing the problem, you're just doing the maths. When it comes to soft skills, you're also trying to figure out how you can ensure that someone else understands what you're doing, what you're thinking, and that means thinking about how your own thought processes work, and trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. You're a trained psychologist of a sort, Will. What can you tell us about the kind of science of all of this?
Yeah, so there's often, or there was an understanding of humans as sort of having what was called a homunculus inside, which basically just looked after everything and made sure you're doing everything right. If anyone's seen the film Inside Out, those sort of emotions inside our mini homunculi. But the problem with this is it doesn't really explain anything. It's sort of it's similar to religious arguments of sort of, well, yes, so everything was made by God, but then what made God? You haven't actually explained the process by which things are done. You've simply used this figure to sort of say, well, he does it all, rather than actually figuring out yourself. But there's quite a big field, and metacognition as a field of research is growing and growing because it's becoming more and more important. This ability to monitor, to correct the cognitive processes that we use day in, day out. There's a broad term used a lot by psychologists called executive function. And that's all well and good, but you need to have a good understanding of when you're doing it right and when you're doing it wrong. And one of the things which I often say to people when they're interviewing is it's not actually a bad thing to give a wrong answer in an interview. It only becomes bad if you don't notice that the line of thinking that you're going down is flawed or incorrect for whatever reason. If you start on an initial conclusion and then as you're working through it, you notice that actually this doesn't fit the parameters of what's been set, you can say that and adjust, absolutely. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that ability to correct yourself when you're doing something wrong. So it's a really important skill to have, and a really important skill to develop, but one that it's not like just flicking on a switch. It's something that just takes time.
Yeah, thanks, Will. So to kind of make this a little bit easier, because I appreciate that this is all rather abstract, I've put this forward in terms of a few kind of oppositions, and like all binary oppositions, these are to an extent nonsense, but we'll try and work through them. So the ones that I came across when I was thinking about the difference between a hard skill and a soft skill, one I encounter every day is the hard skill of Microsoft Excel versus the softer skill of Microsoft PowerPoint. I spend most of my time getting all of the answers in Excel, but I don't have to present them to other people. And me showing them 2 gigabytes of Excel and going, look, it tends not to work. I have to present it like this in a simpler, clearer format that shows people the important things, not all of the working. This is the difference between reading and writing as well. In reading, you take in the information, you process it, but then that reprocessing so that someone else can understand it, that's the process of writing, which I think we all find much harder than reading. Again, this is, I think, an idea that Wittgenstein puts forward, that you don't really understand something until you can teach it to someone else. You might think you understand calculus, but until you try and teach it to someone who doesn't know anything about calculus, you won't realize that there are holes in your understanding that are only exposed by that kind of encounter with someone who doesn't know it. And this is kind of as well the difference between ability in a kind of raw sense and leadership. You might know all the answers, but unless you can show other people how to get to them as well, you're not going to have any great success. There's a marvelous clip for those of you who enjoy football from a few years ago from the World Cup, where Diego Maradona is furiously demonstrating to his footballers how you score a free kick. And he's there in dress shoes and a suit, and he can just do it. And of course, that isn't how leadership works. You don't walk out, you don't walk into the meeting and go, well, you just be really talented and do the thing. That's not how you get results, by assuming other people can do it just because you can.
This is reminding me a lot of one of my lecturers, actually, Matt. In our first year, in our neurophysiology modules, there's a lecturer who's clearly a very, very intelligent man. And as I understand it, very, very highly paid as well. But so clearly knows what he's doing. But his ability to convey that to young undergraduates who were pretty new to neurophysiology just was awful. I'm not sure if he's still doing it, but there is this really clear distinction between being able to do something yourself and being able to help other people do it as well.
Yes, I can't remember the exact story of this from the sort of the teaching of the world of teaching in the context of maths, but I seem to remember there is substantial evidence that people who get a third in maths tend to be better maths teachers than people who get a first. As you need to have found it hard to be able to teach it, as otherwise you won't understand what other people are doing wrong. So I mentioned maths, as I thought a good example of this was the professor of the public understanding of science at Oxford. This is a man called Marcos de Sotoy. His job is to explain maths to normal people. Now, I don't know if you've ever met any normal people, but what you'll find is that normal people have a, I would say, sub-GCSE understanding of maths on the whole, in that they did a maths GCSE and then promptly forgot about it. And his job is to try and explain maths and science more broadly to people who, frankly, can't remember how to do algebra. Again, the point here being that, knowing the science, being able to do all of this impressive stuff is brilliant. But if you want to communicate it to ordinary people who haven't had all those years of training, that's the soft skill of being able to take it out into the real world. And again, this is this question of metacognition. You have to not only do the thinking, but you don't have to think about the thinking so that you can figure out a way of making it work for someone else's brain rather than just for yours.
So this is, and I don't know if this point is, I should save this for later, but I get to see a lot of feedback forms for students who apply to Oxford or Cambridge. They made an application on their own, they've given it their best shot, and they're pretty upset that they haven't made it. And then they're, Googling and they find us and they think, oh, well, I'd like to have a chat with someone about this. So I do see quite a lot of feedback forms from unsuccessful applicants. One of the most common things that they say at interview, and this is particularly for the more STEM subjects, so maths, computer science, engineering, is that, they're able to solve the problems, the questions that were given, but actually the way that they were able to express their working out was what let them down. And so using your hard skill, soft skill thing earlier, the hard skill is probably the admissions test, just being able to see the thing, work it out on paper, get to an answer. When you get to interview, that doesn't cut it anymore, because everyone at interview has that hard skill sorted. They've all done well at the test. It's really down to, okay, who is actually able to not only work it out, but explain it and work collaboratively on something like that.
Thanks, Will. So that sort of leads us on, perhaps even too well, onto our second part, which is to think about the soft skills that Oxbridge is looking for, which brings us that those of you who are loyal attendees of these will know about the pie chart. And now, while the slides have been substantially revamped, which has been the work of the last week for me, the pie chart, it remains, but it has been slightly revised. So I'm going to talk about this very briefly, which is that one of the things we found in our ongoing research process this year is that compared with previous years, we're seeing a small but significant uptick in the impact of the admissions test on whether people get interviews or not, and particularly this year, particularly with Oxford, and a small downtick in the significance of the exam grades. Now, of course, the exam grades, particularly the GCSEs, are really important, but we find, particularly as students with centre assessed grades are moving through the system, that more weight is being put on the admissions test than before, because of the greater scope for comparison between students it offers. But Will, if you can fill us in on the other parts. I'm sorry, I've stolen your thunder there a little.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So actually, sort of, early last year, we were all anticipating that something like this would happen. And at the time, I was being a bit careful to rely on conjecture too much. But it's interesting to see that it did sort of follow what we'd anticipated. If the exams become less standardized and less reliable, then they're going to start relying on other parts of the application. But yeah, so to take you through this, the first thing to say is, of course, this is generalization. And it is, it varies across subjects, and it varies between university. So it varies between Oxford and Cambridge. But it's quite a good rule of thumb to be aware of. And particularly, when I'm speaking to students and they're doing their application on their own, based on the stuff that they do at school, they spend so much time on the personal statement they hardly spend any time thinking about the other things until right before it. But really, this chart is there to help demonstrate, well, actually, you should be spending your time on the things which are most important and are most heavily weighted. Every incremental improvement on your admissions test score is going to lead to a significant improvement in your overall holistic application profile compared to every incremental improvement at the personal statement. So certainly when time is restrained, which for most Oxbridge applicants are busy. They've got lots on at school, they've got lots of other things that they're doing, so most students are busy. So when it comes down to it and you're thinking, well, should I be spending this next hour on the test or on the personal statement? Potentially, you should be using this pie chart to help you make that kind of decision, okay? So you can see that the test and the interview take up a huge proportion of this overall weighting. And they do, it's very, very important. Naturally, Oxford and Cambridge have complete control over both the admissions test and the interview. So they can set them up to test exactly what they want to test. And naturally, someone who does very well in them is going to be the kind of applicant that they're very interested in. And the exam grades, yes, you know, they are standardized, but more so nowadays, they are becoming a less reliable source of information about an applicant. The key thing, I said earlier, there are some differences. The key thing really to say is the main difference between the universities is based on the fact that Cambridge interview the vast majority of their applicants. So for Oxford, some of the more competitive courses, they're only interviewing 20%, 25% of their applicants. Then most of them is around 40% odd. There are a few odd one out, like chemistry, where they interview sort of 95% of their applicants. Whereas Cambridge, on the other hand, interview for pretty much every subject over 70% of their applicants. What this means is, before you get to interview, Oxford have to do quite a lot of shortlisting, and they have to select pretty rigorously. So if you imagine this pie chart without that grey section for interview, and the space that is left is sort of taken over, well, it had been roughly taken over half by grades and half by test score. I imagine it's slightly more by test score, but you can imagine that the exam grades and the test score become much more important because they're more or less the only thing that Oxford has to go off of until you get to the interview phase. For Cambridge, you're bound to get to the interview phase anyway, so you can really picture yourself as, you know, this is the way you're going to be measured. But for Oxford, there's that first stage that you have to get through, whereby the test and the grades are even more important. It's for that very reason that there are some students that I have to recommend actually an application to Cambridge would be more sensible than to Oxford's, simply because your grades aren't sufficient enough to get you through that first hurdle for Oxford, whereas they would be for Cambridge. And then, of course, you can make it back up with a very strong test and very strong interview performance. The main takeaway here for you know, any students out there is pay the admissions test and pay the interview a lot more attention than you do the personal statement. Of course, the statement is important, but I mean, I've seen lots of feedback forms and lots of details about the way that they weight everything. In particular, the personal statement was the last thing that they considered, less important than school references. And generally, people don't realize that. I think that's pretty much all I can say about it.
Yeah, that was very thorough, Will. Thank you very much. And again, for those of you who are applying for medicine, we have some really interesting data on the impact of even getting an extra 1 or 2 questions right on your application in the admissions test, which can be really interesting to look at. I believe we have a blog post about that, if not already published, certainly on their way. So as Will mentioned, the Oxbridge interview, this is all about sort of mimicking the structure of the Oxbridge teaching style, so that the kind of tutorial model, where you sort of sit in a room with 2 or 3 other students with the academic, and you work through the ideas together. That is how they're sort of designing the interview. It's going to be a conversation. They're going to try and sort of pull out of you as much as there is to be had. and to find out how much they want to teach you. Not how much you know, not how much you don't know, but how much they think they can teach you and how pleasant they think you will be to teach. You know, you'll hear horror stories about people being asked, you know, bizarre questions like, oh, tell me about a banana. How much does the earth weigh? How much water is in all the seas? You won't get one of those thrown at you out of the blue. If it comes up, it will be because it's part of a broader, more complex kind of conversation that's trying to push you towards using your existing knowledge in new and interesting ways. Nothing too weird is going to happen. In fact, the interviews themselves are fairly strictly set up. So looking through this is taken from the Oxford Law Handbook, explaining to the admissions tutors how they have to do things so they don't, you know, behave in a naughty manner. The three criteria they're looking for are concentration, the enthusiasm, thoughtfulness, be able to maintain an argument that isn't full of contradictions, and if you end up down a kind of a blind alley of bad thinking, that you're smart enough and self-aware enough to break away from that and try something else, and that when you communicate that you're clear, you're articulate, and that your presentation is really you know, careful and considered. And again, these are all the soft skills we've been talking about that the interview is testing. If you look through all of these adjectives here, it's really only concentration and thoughtfulness, I think, that are firmly in the hard skills section. The rest of this is all about being able to measure what you're doing against the person you're speaking to, being able to vary the tone, the style, the content, and most importantly, I think, from a soft skills perspective here, being able to break free from unproductive thinking. A clear marker of someone who lacks those soft skills is someone who doesn't notice when everyone else in the room is trying to signal to them that they're going down the wrong path. So we've agreed. Oh, Will, sorry.
I just want to say, because there's often two things. Firstly, as Matt said, you know, these questions are rarely given in isolation. It's usually part of a wider conversation, and they will, even if you do start going along the wrong route, they will usually try and nudge you towards the right thing, as Matt was saying. And it's very often some students misunderstand. They think, well, you know, I think I need to be independent and stick to my guns and, you know, be confident in my conclusion and my analysis. But actually, that's the worst thing that you can do. You know, it's completely understandable that you might misconclude something. But so in the example of psychology, you might be addressing some findings from a study, and they might add in new information. So they might say, well, what if I told you that they ran a concurrent study and they controlled for X, Y, and Z? You should then be ready to say, okay, that's really interesting, but that probably means that what I said was wrong and we'd have to find a different solution. You can't sort of double down and just be like, no, I'm going to stick with what I said because I don't want to look academically weak or anything like that. And then the second point about interviews is, so there are two different things when it comes to intelligence, or two different terms used often at the moment, and that is fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. And there's, again, a misconception that Oxbridge are very, very interested in crystallized intelligence, and that is sort of understanding of facts, figures, just overall things that you know. Crystallized intelligence isn't really something which you're at your best for that in midlife, really, because it's something that you develop over a long period of time. They're much more interested in your fluid intelligence, and so they're not interested in the fact that you've read a book and that means that you know X, Y, and Z. They're interested in the fact that you bothered to read a book and you developed some interesting ideas as a result of it.
Thanks, Will. There's a joke that Umberto Eco used to tell before he died, along these lines, where he has a guest round his house and they see all of his books, and the guests go, "Oh, Signore Eco, you have so many books. How did you read them all?" And he goes, "Oh, I haven't read any of these books. Why would I keep books I've read? These are the books I'm not going to read. So I keep the information inside the books if I'm not going to read them. The books I've read, I keep the information in here." And I think this is a really good way of thinking about the difference between crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence, as Will says. If you're trying to find a way to store facts and figures, you can find them in Wikipedia, you can print them out and put them in books. The trick is to know how to use them once you've opened the book, not to be a book yourself, because unfortunately you're not. The technology of books much more powerful than the technology of the human brain when it comes to storing information, sadly. So that brings us on to the kind of final question. Hopefully we've convinced you that soft skills are important. So what are you going to do? Because hopefully you're now going to be focusing on developing these soft skills. So the first thing to think about is, what you need to think about is sort of broadening your horizons in general. So you want to understand not just the subject that you're thinking of applying for, whether that's chemistry or English or classics, but understanding the areas, the ways other subjects sort of impinge upon that subject, the little bits that come around it. If you're applying to study chemistry, you might want to understand a little bit about the history of the ideas that created the periodic table. Why is the periodic table like this? Why doesn't it go up and down rather than side to side? Try to engage in these kinds of questions, not just where your field overlaps with other fields, but also why chemistry works the way it does, why English is studied the way it is, why it is that we care so much about the Romans and so little about the Phoenicians. Try to engage with questions that are going to force you to think more broadly. The next thing is to then take these ideas you found or other ideas and really practice discussing them in that intellectual academic kind of style. I know that many schools offer debate clubs. There are organizations like the Model United Nations, the Model European Parliament, and I imagine these things have actually become much more accessible thanks to the virus. Or if these aren't available at your school or you don't want to join in with them online, just something as simple as joining a subject-related group chat, having a book group, little things like this, so that you're forcing yourself to practice this kind of discussion and debate. And the other thing here is we talked a lot about the kind of slightly more intellectual side of soft skills, but you do also need to practice it on real people. You want to go out there, meet people who are different from yourself, engage with them, take them seriously as human beings, and develop that sense of empathy and consideration. And this is, best easily done through food banks, through charity work, through a whole range of things, to really get that practice of putting yourself in other people's shoes and learning how to not just know things, but also how to communicate them. Whether that's something as complex as a particular theory about the structure of the atom, or something as simple as helping someone understand how they can, get to the food bank or engage with a particular public service, or something really small. These things all sort of fit together. The other thing to say is we focused on applying to Oxford and Cambridge here, but obviously the bad news is that if you don't get into Oxford or Cambridge, probably you will have another competitive interview again in the rest of your life, whether that's in the context of trying to get a job, whether it's in the context of trying to get a date, whether it's in the context of trying to get a promotion. This will not be the last time that you are being compared with other people on the basis of your ability to communicate in an interesting and impressive way. And this goes particularly for people who do decide to sort of stick with academia. As Will mentioned earlier, the more knowledgeable you become, the more important it is to be able to communicate your ideas. You always run the risk when you become very knowledgeable that you can't actually explain what you do to anyone else, at which point the value of what you do goes down very quickly, because outside of yourself, it doesn't really have any application. And this is all just to say that if you're, planning out your life as a young person, those relationship skills are going to be the key to progress in almost every walk of life. It's a rather unfair system we live in, where for the first 18 years, the thing that matters is exams. And then for the subsequent 70 years, exams don't matter at all. There's no exam to get up to find a wife. There's no exam to get a job. All of this turns out to be about relationships and communication instead, which is very frustrating for those of us who are good at exams. But I think is a realization that's worth coming to sooner rather than later. So that brings us on to how we can help. So Will, you can walk us through the brand new slides explaining our range of programs.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Before you click the, oh no, too late.
No, I can go back. Well, we have the power.
So I was just going to say, building on that, one of the first things that I discussed with one of my tutors was the nature of academia and sort of how it works. And one of the things that stuck with me was they were saying, look, the age of the lone researcher who sort of just works everything out on their own is pretty much over. Everything nowadays is a collaboration, not just between colleagues within a single university, but between universities across the country, across the world. And so Matt's absolutely right. You know, if you just know what you know and you're not able to work with that with anyone else, you're going to find it quite difficult, because really you need to learn how to collaborate with others, and then you'll be able to actually progress a lot better. You know, there are so few research papers nowadays with just one name on them. It's usually 2, 3, several. So absolutely, it's a really important skill to have. That's all I wanted to add. I can go on to the programs now.
Sorry, Will. I should have given you the opportunity. No, go ahead. So yes, to talk about our programs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are in 4 parts. Will, tell us about the parts.
Yeah, 4 key parts. Just more holistically overall before I do that. Obviously, these programs are designed to do a few things. They are there to help students prepare specifically for individual parts of their application. So it's there to help you develop better at the test. It's there to help you develop a better personal statement. But behind that is the idea that actually this program is there to help make you a stronger academic overall. And yes, we then apply that to the test. We apply that to these different hurdles. But building you up as a student, as an academic in your field, is going to make you a good applicant for Oxford or Cambridge. And actually training to a test or training to an interview exclusively isn't the best way to do it. You need to build yourself up first. If you click through to the next slide, Matt, that would be great. So how do we do that? So there are 4 key parts, as Matt said, and one of those parts is materials and resources. So all of our students are working independently. They're working with the support of the program. They have tutorials and classes, which we'll come on to later. But one thing that's key in these programs is the drive of the individual student and their own self-study. We can't study for you. You have to be ready to put in the effort, put in the hours, and make a difference to yourself as a student, as an academic. But we can make sure that you're working with the right tools. So what we do is we've written quite a number of textbooks at this point about all the different tests, the different parts of the application. And we've also designed a number of ways where you can practice and prepare. So not only working through textbooks or doing mock papers sort of written, but we've also developed our preparation platform so that you can do practice sort of whenever you want off your laptop, but also that you can sort of play around with those different modalities, particularly last year when a lot of tests moved to a virtual platform rather than being done pen and paper. Certainly helpful to have tried it in that modality before the real thing. And this will make up, you know, the self-study will make up an important part of the program. It's not, like I said before, it's not going to work if the student themselves isn't ready to really commit, really put in the time. Which brings me to the next slide. And this is our preparation portal. This is something we're constantly developing and improving. But you can see it's sort of split into these few different sections.
Oh, no, sorry, I didn't. I thought I could get the video to run by just pressing forward. I'm sorry. So the exciting news for those of you who are watching is that I re-edited this video this morning, I mean, Will has only seen it once before.
We'll see if I can get the timing right.
So if he can get the timings right, it's going to be an adventure. Here we go.
I feel like it might be a bit too quick for me. But anyways, so look, this portal combines a few different things. And of course, this is for a specific test. Different tests will have different sort of basics, fundamentals to them. But a lot of the more STEM-based subjects will have tests which rely on a sufficient understanding of scientific principles. So there's a section there for you to work through all of that. Equally, practice is so important. Having a tutor is not a substitute for good, frequent practice. So we put in lots and lots of practice questions so that you can develop on your skills, and particularly for different sections. You know, we really want to isolate what you're struggling with, focus on that in detail. And then once that's worked on, you then might be ready to start going through the test completely. So this is a past paper. We write our own specimen papers as well. And you're able to go through the whole thing and really see how you manage on that. One mistake students often make is when you only look at problems in isolation, you can have an inflated sense of how well you're doing with them. To take the UCAT as an example, if you only do the verbal reasoning on its own, you only do the quantitative reasoning on its own, you only do the decision making on its own, you can get very good at those. But if you don't actually have any practice of going straight from one to the other, you're going to be put off balance on the day. And like I said earlier, when you're practicing, yes, you can focus on individual parts, but you really want to move into being able to do the test as a whole. It is a jolly fast video, that, Matt.
Yes, I'm realizing now that while I wanted it to be faster because I was bored of watching it when I re-edited it, maybe it was actually much too fast. That'll be a project for next week.
I think probably we need another poll to understand the ideal speed.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I'll pop that in.
Okay, thank you.
So the question would be something like, how was the video? Too fast, much too fast, very, very fast?
Or just right?
I fear it was not right. Even I having edited it that way. I'm sorry, everyone.
But look, it's just a brief demonstration to show you how these things work. The point is, there's lots of different things and ways to approach a test, something like this, and the portal is our solution for that. It gives you the opportunity to revise for topics that you struggle on, to practice the ones that you're improving on, and really see how you're doing overall in the test. And that's crucial. Like I said, a tutor is not a substitute for practice. You cannot assume that, well, I'm having tutorials, so I don't have to worry about it too much. This is still going to take work and effort outside of that.
This oh, so I'm going to mute you there for a second. Well, this kind of practice for standardized tests can be really rewarding. I've worked with, this is one of the areas that I specialize in when I do a little bit of tuition. I've worked with students over the years who find these kinds of tests really challenging. And so what I like to do with them is that we try to create a scenario in which the only thing that is going to surprise them is going to be the questions. We'll decide what they're going to wear, what they're going to eat. We will prepare all of the practice questions in the exact format to the extent that we can, so that when they get there, the only thing that's news are the questions. And this kind of platform is really helpful for that. You want to be, if you're worried about your performance in an exam like this, you want to get there and for everything to be boring, because the way you perform badly in exams like this is that you get there and there are like 3 things that are a surprise, and all of a sudden your heart rate is going and you're nervous and stressed. And we really want to avoid that. And so if you've seen every single type of question that could appear, if you've chosen what kind of shoes you're going to wear, all of these things to come together to the point where you get there and you open the test and you go, oh, right, I know how to do that question. I know how to do that question. I know how to do that question. And the prep portal gives you that advantage, because once you've done, I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that for the BMAT, we have well over 1,000 questions. Once you've done 1,000 BMAT questions, I don't think there's a BMAT question that can surprise you anymore. And so when you get to doing the actual thing, you get there and go, God, this is boring. oh, I've spent an hour doing this? Really? Answering these boring questions I've answered 1,000 times? That's the dream. And you only achieve that through this kind of practice. Now we've obviously not emphasized tests today because we've been talking about soft skills, but that does bring us on to enrichment. Will, tell us about enrichment and just how smooth and creamy and enriching it.
Yeah. So our enrichment seminars, I think, are one of the most important parts of the program, really. So what these are, to give you sort of an understanding of how they work on a practical level, and then take you through why we do them. So they run pretty much every Sunday afternoon through the year. We had about 35 subject-specific ones scheduled. We've just decided to add another 8, I think. So there's a lot of material and a lot of stuff there. They're set at the university level, and they're each about 75 to 90 minutes, depending on how much discussion, how many questions there are about the topic. So they're very much interactive. Students are really encouraged to get involved with discussions going on. There are 5 streams, so one for medicine, one for law, one for STEM, one for humanities, and one for economics. And yeah, these have been designed by us and our tutors to give our students a really, really broad understanding of their topics at the university level. I often say to students, I wouldn't want you to go to absolutely every single one. You know, the point of this, and it's the same with wider reading, it's the same with reading lists. The point of it isn't to mindlessly just do everything, and then by the end of it, you sort of be okay. The point is to interact with this on an academically curious and thoughtful level. This is designed to help springboard you into your subject above what you're used to at school. So when there is a topic which you come up against one week and you think, actually, this isn't really what I'm interested in, I wouldn't want you spending lots of time doing all the further reading and wider reading for it. I'd really want you to focus on the topics which you find intellectually stimulating, because that's how you're going to stand out. That's how you're going to develop as an academic. So yes, at the end of the year, you have developed your broad understanding and broad awareness of your overall topic to a level most students won't have. But much more importantly, you'll have hopefully developed sort of 5, 6, 7 or so particular topics, area of interest, and if you've done the wider reading right, areas of expertise. And these are the kind of things that will come across really well. So in my interview, it's not a quiz. They didn't want to quiz me about all the different things in psychology that I knew. We ended up talking predominantly about one topic, and that's because it was the topic that I was very much interested in. And so that is hopefully something that we can work on. And it can be quite tricky, to just say, well, what am I interested in? I'll read a few books and hopefully find out. But the enrichment seminars act as a fantastic platform to help students do that. So yeah, you can see here it sort of says a few things about it. Like I say, this is really, really important. Every week there's a student handout. So it'll say this coming week, if you're doing economics, it's on the impact of autonomous vehicles economically, or maybe if you're doing medicine, it's on psychiatry, or maybe if you're doing STEM, it's on artificial intelligence. So you have a handout with some information about the topic, some things to do beforehand, some things to do afterwards as well. So further reading, videos to watch to learn more about the topic. And again, if it's a topic that you're not interested in, spend that time productively on a topic that you were interested in. Don't waste time learning about something you don't want to learn about. University isn't like school. It's not like GCSEs where you have 3 or 4 subjects that you could take or leave. You are going to be working on the things that you want to do. So it's important to start that from an early stage.
Fab. Thanks, Will. I'm in the process of editing the polls, so I'm a little bit slow.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop you onto an example of everything Will has shown, which is a little clip from one of the enrichment supervisions. I think this is about 6 months old.
One of the first ones from last year, yeah.
Yeah. So these are, as Will says, these are something new that we've added because they were what we felt we were lacking in terms of our programs, based on the feedback we had from students, based on our own understanding. And so this is from one of our first enrichment seminars when we first introduced these back in June, maybe last year?
I think April.
April, Christ.
Time
God.
flies, huh?
It's terrifying, isn't it? You know, the other day someone told me something about 1996. I was like, I remember that. It was 15 years ago.
I don't remember that, Matt.
Yeah, well, there you go. Anyway, here's a little clip about the enrichment seminar. I'm just going to mute both of us so that we don't have too much feedback.
I can't hear them. I don't know if you know that.
Sorry, everyone. I'm going to pause and start again. Maybe muting was the wrong move. Who can say?
So the aims of these whole enrichment supposed to be 24. It's supposed to guide you throughout your application with your wider reading. So everyone knows that you have to do wider reading to support your medical application, to sort of demonstrate that you have an insight into medicine. But the other thing that these enrichment supervisions will do is supposed to help you increase your confidence in discussing these different aspects of your wider reading, because that's what you're going to be asked to do at interview. So I think the best place to start building up your confidence is probably on here and talking in this group. And hopefully throughout all of the wider reading that we'll be doing with you, you'll be feeling a bit more prepared for life as a medical student and as a doctor as well.
I hope that worked.
I can hear that.
There you go. There are probably slicker companies out there working. However, there are none that have the same mix of innovation and aggressive A/B testing in front of audiences that we bring out. One of the exciting parts of this being every week is that if you come every week, occasionally it doesn't work, and it's quite funny. So that gives you a sense of the aims of the enrichment seminars and the support that offers our students to really get that practice in these kinds of discursive contexts that they might not have access to otherwise. And obviously, we also have the day courses. I'm going to throw back to you, Will, while I finish changing these polls.
Yeah, so a student in a program would be working through the materials through the year, coming to these enrichment seminars, going through tutorials, which we haven't mentioned yet. And we like to wrap things up really at the end with these intensive courses. So we used to hold them at, we used to hold them in London. I think a number of these photos are from the ones we did 2 years ago. Last year it all had to be run virtually, and this year there's a high likelihood that it'll have to be run virtually again. But these are an opportunity, so they're usually, the test ones usually 7 or 8 hours long, really giving that test your full attention, focusing on it, working in groups, so learning collaboratively from other people and what they've learned and how they've developed through the year as well. But really, so we position, particularly for the test ones, we position these just a few weeks before the real thing. So it's really there to make sure that you're able to go over everything one last time. Make sure you've left no stone unturned, make sure that you are performing well and confidently at all the important parts, and that you can walk into it in 3 weeks time or so, knowing that you are ready for this test and knowing that you are prepared. Like Matt said earlier, there shouldn't be any surprises. So you can walk into it confident that you know what you're doing. Equally, it might be that you come to this intensive course and you see, oh, actually, there's one section of the test that I haven't looked at recently, and I thought I was doing very well on that. That's why I hadn't really bothered with it too much recently. But it could do with a bit of sharpening up. You've got a few weeks there to focus on any final things that need sorting out. Similarly for the interviews, we hold them a few weeks before the real thing. When we run it virtually, we'll hold it over the weekend, so sort of 5 or 6 hours on Saturday, 5 or 6 hours on Sunday. And then we also have lots of courses dotted around as well. So one for the personal statement and SAQ for Cambridge applicants, one for helping students explore colleges and choosing a college. But yeah, really they're there to work in groups, work collaboratively, and make sure that you're ready for each hurdle of this application process.
Yeah. At the moment, my understanding is through a sort of generalized pessimism, these are planning to be held online again this year, although I remain hopeful that we will be able to do them in person, in which case it is also a nice way to meet other people, to have a sense of what these experiences are like, to feel that you're not alone in this process. And for those of you who are over 18, to say that you're going to meet your mum, but sneak to the pub afterwards and have a little bit of a socialise, which I think all of us are going to be in desperate need of after all this is over. Not that I would condone that at all as an educational professional. That brings us finally on to the question of the one-to-one tuition, which I'm going to let Will tackle while I go and double check my wife is okay, because I heard a bang a moment ago, which is while I was on mute. I think something might have fallen over.
Right, so yeah, I'll carry on with the one-to-one tuition. Look, it's so important that students are working on the right things at the right times. And it's so easy as a student to focus on the things that you're good at and to practice the things that you know you do well in, because it's rewarding when you do something well. My piano teacher used to always get very angry at me because I would only practice the things I could do and I would never practice the things I couldn't do. Now, intuitively, that is the single best way to make sure that you don't improve. And it's a really bad habit and something that we need to try and avoid. Now, having a tutor there will mean not only that there's someone there to keep you on track, there's someone there to help you focus on the things that you're struggling with, but there's also someone there who's been through that process already, supported students through it themselves, and so is able to help guide you with all the advice and expertise that you need. So whenever a student enrolls, one of the first things that we do is, so I would write a report about them, explain the situation, and basically explaining my recommendations and anything additional that I think would be beneficial for the student. And we select a tutor based on that report. We want to make sure that the tutor is suited to the student, because that's really, really important. And then this tutor will be supporting the student all the way through the year. So you've got one main tutor who you'll go to for personal statement advice, to help you with parts of the test that you're struggling with, to help you develop your wider reading and discuss advanced topics that you're interested in. And then nearer to the end, you'll have a number of tutorials with different tutors. And these are because they're mock interviews. So it's very helpful to have mock interviews with someone you don't know, someone you're unfamiliar with. But also, if you think about it, after having done a number of mock interviews with different people, then you have a much broader sense of what to expect. My interview undoubtedly would have been slightly different to the next person who went into the room after me, or the person before me. Equally, it would be slightly more different to the people doing the interviews at the college next door. My interview at my college and my second interview at a different college were pretty different. So it's important to have quite a broad understanding of what to expect. And you don't get that from just one mock interview. You get that from many with different mock interviewers. And of course, this is really important. So it's not a substitute. You can't assume that if you have a tutor, that's that, and you don't have to worry about anything else. You are going to have to complement that with time, your own work, your own time that you're putting into this. That's something that I'm very clear about, and it's really important that our students know that. Yes, you'll be having tutorials, but yes, we very much expect you to be working outside of that. Your tutor will be setting you homework, will be setting you tasks to get on with, and if you're not doing those, then it slows down the natural progress of the tutorials. I'd be a much better pianist now if I'd done the right practice when I was told to, and we were able to use those lessons much more effectively. And that's pretty much all I have on the one-to-one tuition. I don't know if Matt is back. I
Oh,
guess we'll
yeah,
see.
sorry, the crisis has been dealt with.
Is she okay?
Everything is fine.
Okay,
I was
good.
I was overreacting, as so often happens. The big frame we used to hold the laundry on fell over. As I hide the laundry in the other room while I'm doing these, so there aren't pants in the background.
I see. I see.
Yeah, makes me look unprofessional. Obviously, we do provide a lot of feedback on these one-to-one sessions, as Will was talking about. So for those of you who are parents who are perhaps watching and are worried about this, we have an example up there of the kind of feedback that you'll get at the end of each of your son or daughter's tuition sessions. That means that we'll be sending you, and this comes in as an email, as a PDF, fairly snappily after the lesson, working through what's been discussed, what plans there are for future sessions. This is an example of an interview tutorial, really giving you the resources that you need to understand what your son or daughter is working on, to support them, and to get involved in that to the extent that they're comfortable with. You know, if they've been talking about, as comes up here, the way the NHS works, you can talk to them about your experiences of the NHS, get an understanding of what they've been talking about, really understand what they're doing, and also bring any insights, experiences, thoughts you might have to the process as well. I guess brings us, well, as we come to the end of these slides, to the big question, which is that, does it work? All of this, does it work, or is it a waste of time?
Yeah, good question.
Well, the good news is the next slide answers this famous question.
Yeah, so I think we're still waiting for full data from this year's applicants.
Yeah,
So
that's something I'm working on at the moment. It's surprisingly complicated, but we're hoping to, within the next 2 or 3 weeks, have an updated number based on how things have gone this year as well.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are interested in the kind of sustained level of the track record, please do come back for the new number.
So yes, so this is taken from, this cohort will be the people who started their degree this last October. Now this is across all subjects, so you'll notice that I'm sure people who have looked into their own subject specifically, their Oxford or Cambridge success rate might vary from 18%. That's because it's an average across all subjects. And yeah, generally speaking, you know, our success rate will vary from subject to subject as well, but that is our average too for last year's cohort. One thing to bear in mind is, you know, the Oxbridge stats are brought up by subjects like classics, where the acceptance rate is 50% plus. Whereas we generally, you know, students come to us for the more competitive subjects, understandably, because there's more on the line there, and there's more to do. So, you know, we're usually inundated with the medics, the engineers, the computer scientists, the PPEists, all these different very competitive courses. But yeah, it's something we're very proud of. It's something we're constantly working on. And again, one additional thing to say, and it'll be interesting to see how it sort of stacks up for this year as well. But what we found with last year is that obviously 63% is an average. Students that started earlier would do better, and as you leave it later and later in the year to start preparing for this, your chances of success do go down. Understandably, you know, the longer you work at something, the better you are at it. So your performance overall in the application is going to reflect that too. Okay.
Fab. Now, one of the questions that always comes up at this point, and was in the news, I believe, was it in the Telegraph? It's been in the Telegraph today. Is to understand how these results work in context. And so we're particularly proud that our results compare really favourably with the schools that put forward the most applicants to Oxbridge. We do better than Eton, who are very upset about it, if you've read the Telegraph today. And it's terrible news because, as everyone knows, there are really no advantages to an Eton education outside of getting into Oxbridge. So bad news for them. That's their business model in trouble. But even with the top state schools, Hills Road, which I used to live on the road of, nice school, and a range of other leading schools, we beat them all, we like to think. And so we're very proud of that.
Just so you can compare cohorts as well, for this year that we're talking about, the 63% year, I think our Oxbridge year group was about 160 to 180 students. So, you know, it's not the case of, well, and what you'll see actually, so this document, always worth looking at, very interesting for people like Matt and I, maybe not so much for you guys. But what you'll see is there will be lots of schools that send 1, 2, or so applicants each year. It's much easier to get 100% success rate when you're only sending 1 student. It gets much more difficult once the student cohorts get bigger and bigger. And, you know, everyone thinks Eton College, they send the most to Oxford.
Well, they certainly try.
They certainly try it, but they do send a lot. But actually, when you're sending that many students, the more students you send, the lower your success rates are bound to become, because, well, you're just sending more people. So, and you'll notice, yeah, there are some schools which have sort of 60% success rate, but they're only sending a handful of people. But yeah, I don't know if anyone would consider looking through this document as fun.
Yeah.
If you're, I know lots of us are bored at the moment.
So yes, this is drawn directly from the from Oxford's website. I can drop a link into the chat later on if anyone really wants to start doing my job as a hobby rather than for money. They can go and look at these statistics themselves. But as I say, it's something we're really proud of in terms of our success as a company, that we're able to outdo some of these schools, almost all of which I believe are more expensive than what we're able to offer. I don't believe we've had any questions on price yet, but I can assure you that it is cheaper than Eton. On the other hand, it doesn't come with those cool outfits. Although I presume you have to buy those in addition to the fees. I've never been to Eton, I must confess. They have snazzy outfits, don't they, with little top hats?
Yeah, so maybe we need to think about a uniform for our students. Maybe that's the next step.
I think that's a good idea. We should look into that. So that brings us finally to a couple more questions, a couple more things we wanted to talk about before we get to the questions. I appreciate this is running much longer than usual.
Much longer, yeah, it's interesting.
Slide section. It has. I would like to think this is an example of us both really selling the soft skills. Maybe that's me trying to be too clever. So we've talked a lot about what we can offer, but we are also relatively selective when it comes to the students we choose to work with. And there's a reason for this. So to speak a little bit about myself for a moment, I was dreadfully arrogant when I applied for Oxford all of, I think, 13 years ago now. I was convinced I was going to get in, that it was going to be an absolute cakewalk. Of course, I didn't. And there were a whole range of reasons for that, including I seem to remember me making something up in the interview and hoping that they, the experts, wouldn't call me out on it, which it didn't work out as it comes to pass. And so when we come to picking our students, we try to take that risk into account, so to speak, which is to say that when we're deciding who we want to work with, what matters to us is having the right attitude, not whether you have got the absolute tip-top A-levels in your school. If we're choosing between 2 students and one of them is highly motivated, they're passionate, they really love the subject, but their A-levels are a little bit, their GCSEs, their A-levels are a tiny bit lower, we would much prefer to work with that student than over a student who is arrogant and lazy and has these spectacular grades and is convinced they're just going to waltz into the place, because that never works.
Sounds like I wouldn't have accepted you onto a program if we'd chatted back then.
No, well, I mean, the great disadvantage that you would have been at, Will, is I think you were, I think at this point in time, 11 years old. So I might have been able to outsmart you, but but I take the point.
Yeah, it's so. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Will.
You're very polite. So what I was just to say, because I guess I'm a bit more on the front of this. There are students that I won't make recommendations for. More often than not, it's not that their grades aren't strong enough, it's that their attitude isn't right. You know, if I'm not convinced that a student is going to work hard on this, then I don't want us to go through the effort of putting together a program which isn't actually going to be used. Matt said, yeah, absolutely. We're much more interested in attitude, and we'll often take on students with below average GCSEs for their subject. Because if you think about it, if we go back to that pie chart, if the GCSEs are 25% of the decision to accept you, and those are stellar, they are perfect, you've still got 75% left. And if you're not going to work on that, 25% isn't going to swing it. But if you're a bit below in that first segment, that 25%, first 25, 30%, and you're going to put in everything for the rest, actually that's where we can make a lot more movement. And there are a number of students that I speak with who've been told by their school not to apply. They've been told by the school your GCSEs aren't good enough. But that's not quite the truth. The truth is the GCSEs combined with whatever the school can rustle up wouldn't be good enough. You know, whatever, if they're able to give them one mock interview and a bit of personal statement support, that combined with their GCSEs isn't good enough to get an offer. But actually with the right kind of preparation, the right kind of attitude, those kind of GCSEs are workable. And so those are the kind of students that I can take on. And I'm very happy to, and I'm even happier when they get their offers. So yeah, and anyone who's spoken with me or one of my team already will notice that we do ask about the students' motivation, why they want to do it, how much time they're ready to put into this. One of my team was speaking with someone who was only ready to put in an hour a week. And ultimately, that's just not enough. And it's just not going to work.
Yeah. Now, as we've said, we're really keen that students commit to these programs that we offer, and we try to kind of formalize that through what we call the Student Honour Code, which will again tell us about the Honour Code, because I was not involved in the creation of the Honour Code.
Yeah, so this is basically at the start of a student's program. It's just an agreement between the student and us, them saying, you know, I am going to work hard. I am going to, you know, do the things that my tutor is setting me. I'm going to show up to tutorials. Generally pretty basic principle stuff that, you know, is going to be really, really important if this is going to work or not. And ultimately, you know, it's not, because I'm quite selective with the students that I take on, we don't have these problems so much anymore that students just don't show up. But it's really important that the students that we take on take responsibility for this. Yeah, it says there, making them accountable. You know, this is your education, this is your future, and we're going to do everything we can to help you achieve it. But you need to be driving this train. And yeah, right at the start, students say, yes, this is, I am going to do this. I am going to do the things that I'm told. Because again, like I said earlier, if you're not doing the tasks and homework set outside of tutorials, the process is going to be much, much slower, and it's not going to work.
Fab. Thanks, Will. So that brings us right to the end of these. We like to foreground the stories of students who we've been able to work with successfully. These are two that have come to us in the last few weeks from Trustpilot. We had an absolute flurry of reviews, as you might imagine, at the end of January as the offers started coming in. And so we really appreciate the nice things that people come and say about us, particularly as in these cases when they are entirely true. And we encourage any of you who are feeling a little bit hesitant to spend some time on Trustpilot to look at the examples of students we've worked with, and to get that kind of from the mouth of either the student or the parent, and really understand the support we've been able to offer. I'm going to skip past this without you being able to have the chance to read the whole thing, because you can very much find them on Trustpilot.
Yeah, go ahead.
to talk briefly about the 2-week trial. Unlike the honour code, this was a system I set up. And the reason being that, as Will has said, we make a huge effort to be careful and selective and to pick out the right students. As a company, we take huge pride in saying that if we are not right for you, we won't try and get you onto the course. It would be the easiest thing in the world for us to ship in thousands and thousands of poorly qualified students from rich, ill-informed parents and work with them, and they wouldn't get in, and it would be dreadfully profitable. But unfortunately, it would be bad for our success numbers, and it would be bad on a more moral level. So what we do is, in addition to being selective when it comes to choosing the students we work with, we also offer a 2-week trial. That's to say that for all of our programs, you will be able to receive a full refund if after 2 weeks you've tried the enrichment seminars, you've tried the resources, you've spent some time with your tutor, and it's just not right for you. That's fine. You can walk away, we'll shake hands, no harm done on either side. And this is all about, as I say, ensuring that we have a good match between the right parent, the right student, and the right program. If we're not for you, that's absolutely fine. But we want to make sure that you can try our services in confidence. And we're pretty damn confident that you'll be impressed once you do join, which is why we offer this in the first place. Will, do you have anything to add on the trial?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it all. Like, it really boils down to, look, I don't really want a student in a program that isn't working for them. I do my utmost best to make sure that my recommendations are as good and as sort of suitable as possible. And we also do our best to make sure that we can explain everything as fully as possible so that students have a really clear sense of everything coming into it. But, you know, if something isn't quite right, yes, so we'll do everything we can to fix it. You know, let's say week 1, you've had a bit of trouble getting onto the preparation platform. That's certainly something we can fix. But if intrinsically the program isn't going to work, I don't want a student stuck in something which isn't working. It's counterproductive. It's very counterproductive.
Fab, thanks. We've got a few questions coming in already. We're about to get to the question section. I think we have 1 slide left, so don't panic on that front.
We're only going to have 15 minutes for questions, Matt. This is the shortest Q&A.
Well, we'll see. Maybe there won't end up being so many questions, and it would have been a work of genius on my part.
Maybe. I need to drone on less about random psychology things.
Cool. So as I say, this is a really broad and surprisingly detailed presentation of what we're able to offer. We really recommend that you, if you have further questions, if you are keen to get involved, that you follow the instructions on the little animation that are taking place, and book a consultation. That'll allow you to speak to Will or Dylan or one of their colleagues. There are in fact 2 Wills now, which is very confusing for me.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to talk you through your options and make recommendations on that basis. So I'm going to sort of leave that running as we look through a few questions.
Time. I'll start with the first one because that's quite a simple one.
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Nafisa has asked, can a candidate apply for both universities at the same time? I presume she means Oxford and Cambridge.
That's what was my understanding too.
Because, well, there are many more universities, but yes, of those 2, as an undergraduate applicant, UCAS won't let you apply to both. Okay. The reason being, the 2 universities don't want to be in direct competition with each other. The difficulty is if you allow them to apply to both. So at the moment, if you apply to Oxford and you get your offer, Oxford know relatively confidently that you're not going to pick Southampton over them, relatively confidently. Whereas if you were to apply to both, then you'd have this, and you got offers to both, you'd have this issue of, you know, priorities. Oxford and Cambridge take a lot of effort to make sure that they send out the exact number of offers, which will mean that they fill the exact number of places. So they generally over offer because they know that a number of applicants won't meet their conditional grade requirements. But this is quite well sort of worked out, and having this extra competition would just make it too difficult to really work out what was going on. Last year, of course, everyone got their offers. So both Oxford and Cambridge were pretty over inundated with applicants. And that's just an example of what can go wrong if they don't have a very tight understanding of the applicants. So from a graduate, if you're a graduate, yes, you can apply to both. As an undergraduate, no.
Yeah, just to add to what Will says, if you, this is a good example of how to exercise game theory, if any of you are ever interested in these things. If you could apply to both, then almost everyone would apply to both. This would mean that they wouldn't be able to interview everyone, so roughly half the number of people would get interviews. Some people would get 2 offers, some people would get no offers. The whole thing would be it would be a disaster. I know this is done differently in America, where if you want to, you can apply to Harvard and Princeton and Yale, but they have an awful lot more money, and the process is entirely different there anyway. And so this is all just for the purposes of fairness. Oh, that went West Country for a second there. This is all for the purposes of fairness. They don't want to have too many people applying to Oxford, too many people applying to Cambridge, and then the top half of, in the end, what would happen is the top 25% rather than the top 50% would get the offers, and half the places would be unfilled, and the whole thing would be a dreadful mess. So there's a logic to it for certain. Well, we have a question about international medics at Oxbridge. If you can answer that for us, cheers.
Yes, it's quite specific about the number of Oxbridge medical students in this last intake. The short answer is that you have to wait a couple of weeks to be able to know that specifically, because we are still waiting for results and information to come through about our applicants. Generally speaking, so across all the international applicants for medicine at Oxford or Cambridge, and there's usually a couple of thousand, and there are 31 places. Usually a few of those are our students. So we usually sort of make up a handful of them. Naturally, international Oxbridge medicine is very competitive. So we're pretty happy just that we can make up even one of those 31 would still be a significant number. But yeah, tune in a couple weeks' time for more specifics about this last intake.
Yeah, we're hoping to bring those numbers to you, I think in 3, maybe 4 weeks, along with the newest application data about reapplications, because I know that's a question Hugo has raised. As Will says, there are fewer than 100 places in Oxbridge, across Oxford and Cambridge. I think maybe even fewer than 50 for international applicants. As Will says, there are thousands of people applying for them.
Yes, so sorry, I said something wrong earlier. I said 31. It's 14 at Oxford and 21 at Cambridge, so it's 35 altogether.
There you go. So 35 places, and that tends to be of, well, I can double check while Will is answering the next question, just to get some numbers from the Oxford data set I work with. It's unbelievably hard to get in. We're unbelievably proud when any of our students get into Oxbridge International Medicine. But this cap on places, which is put in place by the UK governing body for medicine, the BMA.
No, it's GMC.
Is it the GMC? I'm sorry.
Yeah, GMC do it.
Essentially, the story is these are British universities. The job of them is to produce British doctors to work in British hospitals. And so there's a cap on the number of people who they're worried will escape after having undergone a very expensive and impressive training. They'll run off back to Taiwan or somewhere else that's nicer than Britain. It's much nicer, I'm afraid. And so there is this cap. It's not something that we're big fans of. We would much rather that they simply trained more doctors that instituted this cap, but it's sadly not something we're in control of. And it isn't on the agenda of any political party at present, despite all of the letters I do send to Keir.
Sure,
that-
I can do Hugo's question if you want to have a look at anything.
That will be great, because I'll probably have something to add on to, Hugo's question as well afterwards, as this is my specialism at the moment.
Okay, so Hugo has asked about deferring, or well, actually, I think what he's really asking about is reapplying. So
Yes.
making a deferred application is when so if someone applies this year, someone applies this October, they'd be starting in 2022. Making a deferred application, you apply this year, but you say to Oxford or Cambridge, listen, I want to come, but not until 2023. So you're applying with the provision that you're not actually going to start this cycle, but next cycle. So that's a deferred application. A reapplication, the process is pretty much the same. You still go through the same hurdles as anyone else. You'd obviously, if it says you're reapplying to Oxford rather than Cambridge, Oxford will naturally have different admissions tests. I don't know what your subject is, but it's likely that they'll have an admissions test, some don't. So there will be that difference. But aside from that, it's still just sort of seen as any old application. There are a few general things that we say. So moving university isn't a bad idea, and sounds like you've already decided on that. But also making sure that you can demonstrate in your application this year significant differences to your one last year. What you don't want to do is sort of just stagnate at the point you were last year and expect anything to change. You want to make sure that this year you're hitting it harder, you're doing more impressive things, you're spending that extra year doing something really, really productive. And then even if you were to reapply to Cambridge, then you're in the position to say, well, look, I'm significantly better than I was last year. These are the reasons why you should take me now. I think for people who are still planning on applying to the same university, we usually advise to change college. Yeah, Matt can, what have you found?
Yeah, we don't have specific data on colleges because it's unbelievably hard to gather, and it doesn't tend to be particularly interesting. However, what we do know is the advantage of switching universities. So Oxford and Cambridge do not share a great deal of information with one another. I have a few friends who work at Oxford, and it's something that they find very frustrating. But one of the things this means is if you apply to Cambridge twice in a row, when you apply the second time, there will be a little tag on your application that says he's back or she's back. Now, this doesn't necessarily prejudice your application, but it means that it does show up. Whereas if you apply for Oxford one year and Cambridge the next, they simply won't know because they don't share this information. Now, it's hard to be certain, but we believe that somewhere between 5 and 10% of everyone who applies to Oxford or Cambridge each year had failed to get into the other one the previous year. Again, it's hard to be certain because this isn't data that we can gather on a big picture basis. This is extrapolated from research I've been doing, but we think something of the order of 7, 8, 9% of people, perhaps even more for the top subjects, your economics, your PPE, your medicine. These are people who are applying to one university one year and the next year. Now, the data we have shows that students do, for some subjects, have a better chance the second time round, sometimes quite a substantially different chance, but you're going to have an extra year's experience. You're going to have been through that rehearsal of the interview, which makes a huge difference, and you're going to have really concretized your motivation and your passion for the subject in that extra year. So we've had really good results working with reapplicants. I believe we had a well over 70% success rate with reapplicants to Cambridge this year. I haven't seen the Oxford numbers yet. I don't know if we had any Oxford reapplicants, come to think of it. But it's something that we've had really good results with in the last couple of cycles. And that's something that our research finds is more rewarding than people would think, basically. But again, this is a great opportunity to get in touch with us directly, Hugo. Reapplication is complicated. It's really worth reflecting on what went well, what went badly, and we have specific support that we offer for that. And I believe by specific support, I mean that's something that I have to do. Terrifying, and I normally try not to advertise.
And also another thing is pay attention to the feedback that they give. Matt, I don't know if you know this, but Oxford feedback has started to come through already.
Yes, Dylan's forwarded one on to me this morning. Yeah, it's really interesting. It looks as though things were more competitive this year than we expected.
So one, Cambridge will be a little later because they give their results out later. If you haven't asked for feedback, absolutely do, but really pay attention to that, because that will give you a good sense as, just generally you want to improve everything, but that will give you a good sense as to, okay, this is where I should be spending most of my time, and I also need to improve everything else. Okay.
Fab. We've got a question that's come through the chat from Winston. This again is a really good example of when it's worth getting in touch with us directly. Winston asks, I'm a parent of 2 A-level students currently studying under homeschooling. Will this affect their application? They have not passed through formal schools. Generally speaking, whether you've been to formal schooling or not doesn't make a huge difference as long as the exam result's good, is my experience. Now, if you're going through private candidacy, I know that's been a little more complicated over the last couple of years because of the virus. But if you've managed to overcome that and get good results, then it shouldn't be an issue.
What about predicted grades, Matt?
Yeah, so often the way this works is that you can go and share your grades with a local trusted school, or there are partnerships, I think, with the British Council occasionally for this sort of thing. Or you can work with sort of other bodies to get predicted grades. But I believe some students do apply without predicted grades and just with GCSEs, right?
Well, yeah, but it would depend if those students have sat GCSEs. If they're an international, they might not have.
Yeah, so again, this is, Winston, it is really hard to know without more detailed information, but it's definitely worth a try. Do get in touch and we'll be able to sort of figure out your circumstances directly. I believe we've worked with quite a few students who aren't working through the kind of formal school system before with good results, right? Well,
yes, so it's not impossible. I mean, so I know that sometimes it's better to apply with the grades in hand rather than, and again, it depends on what you're able to do in terms of the predictions. It's just that sometimes when you're not doing it through a school, the predictions are less easy to get. So sometimes it's better to apply with grades in hand. But it's certainly, that's just a delay rather than an obstruction. It's not going to mean that that they're not able to apply at some point and be successful with that application. Again, it really depends on what kind of grades they're getting, because remember, international medicine, jolly competitive.
Yeah, I've just been looking through the numbers for international medicine while you've been talking, actually, and the current rate for international medicine is 1.7% at Oxford.
Okay.
So that's to say that in the 2019 cycle, there were 622 applicants and there were 11 places.
11 places? I could have sworn it was 14. Oh, well.
Maybe you're thinking of Cambridge, which I know have a slightly number. Oh, okay. So Winston children are interested in medicine and they've been through IGSE and British Council.
I think this is probably something for a specific consultation, because we are running out of time and it would be better to talk about more generalized things.
But yeah, you're certainly doing everything. So you're certainly doing everything right so far, though. So do get in touch directly. Hanifa asks about bursaries and support for students from poorer backgrounds. Well, if you can fill us in a little bit on the foundation.
Yeah, and there have been a few questions about sort of costs and things like that. Really, the first step is for us to have a chat. It may be, I'm sure you've been impressed with the stuff that we've been doing, but it might be that actually I say a program isn't suitable, but also the nature of program I recommend is going to is going to affect the cost overall quite dramatically. For the foundation, so the foundation is something that we've set up. Last year we supported 93 students completely for free. So we supported them through the year with their applications. They had the seminars, the courses, the materials, the tutorials, the lot. So certainly for students who are from poorer backgrounds, we really want to help talented students achieve highly. And what I would recommend is you go to uniadmissions.co.uk/foundation to see a bit more about that. And you can also see how you apply. So you need to make a written application with a letter of recommendation from a teacher, that not your head teacher, just a teacher that knows you well. But yeah, please do have a look into that. So, you know, a number of our students don't pay anything for their support, and we're very happy to provide that.
Thanks. Well, we had a question from Maya Fadley. She is keen to have the recording, which I'm sorting out for her. But she also asks about the timing of our work, as she's based in the States. Now, I know that when it comes to working with tutors on a one-to-one basis, obviously that's fairly flexible and you can set up your own times.
Yeah.
And the enrichment seminars, I'm trying to remember, what time slot do they run in at the moment?
How disappointing that you've forgotten, Matt. But yes, so the enrichment seminars are 2 p.m. GMT every Sunday afternoon, which means that they're sort of, you know, students in the US who are taking these programs do have to forego their Sunday afternoon lions, not Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning lions. So that would be running at 8 in the morning. You're absolutely right, Matt. The tutorials themselves really flexible. So that's not really something that's going to be a problem. But those fixed things like the seminars, like the courses, those are run in UK time. And everything is recorded. So I'm sure there will be a few Sunday mornings where a lion is absolutely necessary. We record our seminars so that you can catch up on ones that you miss. Okay, equally, it might be that Sunday mornings you've got something on at school, or every now and again that they are recorded so that you can catch up. Okay.
Yes, we've tried to schedule things such that they're compatible both for people out in Singapore and Hong Kong, as well as for people in New York. The downside of this is it does mean you have to get up dreadfully early if you're in California, but I've heard they like doing that over there, so hopefully they don't mind. But it is the curse of the globe, and not something we can do an enormous amount about. I for one would be perfectly happy to drag America closer, but I understand it's expensive, really very expensive, and have devastating environmental consequences, which would upset the people in California even more, is my understanding. We have a couple of questions about the portal. So we've talked about the cost already, which tends to vary quite substantially from student to student based on need and circumstance. We've also had a question about how many questions we have for the Cambridge Economics exam, and whether it's available now. I believe it works, right?
So the portals are up and running, yes. So students are working through them. ECAA, I know, so as well as the portal, we've also got what we call an academy, which is video lectures for the tests. I think we've got about 30 videos for the ECAA. I don't know the number of questions off the top of my head. Matt, are you?
No, so I haven't checked in with Gergo about this. So the ECAA is very similar in terms of content and level to the TSA, which is basically the Oxford mirror image. And I know that we have hundreds of questions for that, plus hundreds for the ECAA as well. I would imagine if the books are anything to go by, probably north of 500 questions, but please don't hold me to it. I know that we're also working on expanding the question libraries. I was speaking to Toby about this yesterday, to really get new things in. And this sort of came up earlier when we were discussing cost. One of the cost drivers for us is that it's dreadfully expensive to get all these questions written. And so while we would love to be able to provide these platforms for free, one of the challenges is it is not cheap to make them, not just the tech, but also having thousands and hundreds of questions written for them, making sure that those question writers are compensated. It's a big cost driver for us. And so while we put it across at as reasonable a rate as we can, you'd be surprised how much time and effort and cost goes into producing these platforms. And just to round things off, because I know we've run a little bit long because the presentation was too long, which is a surprise.
Yeah, not had that before, really.
Yeah, we'll have to debrief on that later. Humza asks, do we have contacts with the department or admissions team in either Oxford or Cambridge? So unfortunately, this is being recorded, so I don't want to say too much, lest I get into trouble. We don't have any official direct contact with anyone in the admissions teams, as far as I know. We don't have any influence over who gets picked. We don't have any insight into the process that comes from secret information. It's all from our own research and effort. We don't, phone them up and tell them which students to pick or anything like that. Is that right? Well, I don't know if you have any secret contacts.
Well, no, I was just thinking, why don't we, Matt? Our success rates would shoot through the roof if we.
Well, there you go. I mean, we would love to have secret contacts. We would absolutely love it if we could offer a special package at a very high price that meant you were definitely going to get in because we would pay bribes or something like that. Unfortunately, we don't. Everything we're able to do is through work, through research, through effort, through speaking to as many students and other people as we can to understand the process. But in terms of our contacts with the decision makers, unfortunately, they are not known to us, and there's no crossover between us and the actual decisions. All we can do is put students in the best possible position, and then let the decision makers make their decisions. We like to think we know a lot about the process, but obviously compared with the people who are actually in charge, our knowledge is relatively small. Although on the other hand, if you try to speak to the people who are actually in charge, they are remarkably reluctant to help in quite the same way as we are.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, there's, our students don't cheat their way in or sort of get through by some kind of link that we have. It's all about our students working and developing themselves into the best applicants they can be, and then the decision being easy for the admissions tutors in Oxford or Cambridge. There was one question by Susie Bryant, and I'm not quite sure what it's asking, but Matt, maybe you'll know. She says, how commonly is student support given for the courses?
Right. I guess Susie might be asking about the when we have these courses, who comes and delivers them. So this year's been a little bit different because obviously we've been doing everything online. But in the conventional model, where we do it, face to face over down in London, the way would be we would have almost the entire team there. Plus a huge group of tutors, 30 or 40, maybe even more. An absolutely massive force of people, 50 or 60 people, both tutors and people from the kind of the research side of the company, the consult side with Will, the people who run the operational side, Rohan, the big boss. We would all be there helping out and offering insights. So who provides the support? It is a mix of current students, of graduates, of PhD students, of master's students, as well as their support that's offered by Will and I and others on the kind of more professional side of things. But yeah, it is a mix of student support and professional support. And in terms of the courses, we're hoping we're going to go back to the physical world, in which case it'll go back to being a mix of us and tutors and, an awful lot of bodies coming and helping and ready to answer questions. So I think that brings us to the end of things, Will.
Yeah.
In a slightly new format, we have fewer questions but more slides. I'm just flicking through I'm just watching progress on the vaccine question, which for those of you who are new and haven't been here every week, unlike me, I'm here every week. Thank you, Hamza. We didn't think you were asking anything dodgy. We just wanted to reassure everyone else. As we say, we would love it if they would phone us up and go, I hear you guys know what you're talking about. Who do you think we should pick this year? Sadly not. Sadly, it's all we can do is open the door. It's still the professors that have to walk through it. We have a few questions about, sorry, reset them out for a second. Just to sort of close, this is something we've been asking every week since we started these again after Christmas, which is about the vaccine, because I like to end on a positive note. So on our very first week back in January, only half of people who came along knew someone who had had the vaccine, whereas today, only 6% of people know no one who has had the vaccine. A further 6% only know one person who has had the vaccine. Almost half of people know between 1 and 5 people, 20% more than 5, a further 6% more than 10 people, and 20% of people, more than 20 people they know have had the vaccine.
I'm still pretty upset that Chris Whitty isn't a regular viewer, though.
I know. Well, he's probably busy, but I like to end on that as a positive note. The vaccine news is increasingly positive. So many more of us have had it than we had a few weeks ago. My wife had it yesterday. I don't know if you or Amber has had a go yet, Will?
Amber's had it, yeah. She works in an intensive care unit, so she had to have it.
There you go. So things are progressing. The world is improving. And as I say, we'd like to end on a positive note. Thank you very much, Will, for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for coming along.
Thank you all. We'll see you next week when we'll be talking about the law. Or rather, I think Ben is going to be talking about the law because I know nothing about the law.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you very much.